Hi there, Isha here, and welcome to The Higher Life, where I take concepts that are considered esoteric, spiritual and new agey, and show you how you can apply these practically to really empower your life. And that certainly is the purpose here of each teaching, that while we unpack this concept, whichever concept it is that I choose to contemplate for this week, what we really want to see is how can this be applied in a very practical way. And when it is, I feel more empowered. I feel like I'm able to live as myself in this world in a much more happy state. I mean, it's so simple really, isn't it? What we all want is sustainable happiness. We want to be able to hold ourselves in our lives in a way where we can generally feel good. We can feel okay about who we are in the moment. And it's something very fluid, and that's what's brought me to the topic of today's teaching, which is what is non-duality and duality. It is a concept that is brought up a lot in, I think, the more hardline spiritual circles, and there really are these hardline teachings or people who've gone really into the depth of the teaching of the ancient, of the more ancient teachers, and have really started to bring this out into the world. And I'm not somebody who really fully understands the teachings at that level. I mean, I do in an intellectual sense, but I often get lost when I'm listening to, even at times, Eckhart Tolle, who I love, and I do understand the nature and the lessons that he is carrying forward from Buddha and from some more of the ancient wise people that were around centuries ago. But sometimes it just gets lost on me and on how do we actually live this day by day, and especially as a woman. It's something that always arises in me when I'm listening to a lot of teachers online and teachers that share teachings that I really resonate with. They're usually men. It is very unusual, in fact, to receive teachings from a woman, and especially a mother, a woman who's spent a large part of her life raising children. And I find this an interesting, gap in some ways, and is what is it like for women to be really at ease with themselves in their lives, knowing that we go through a lot of physiological changes that men don't, such as obviously going into puberty and going through menopause. Our experience of ourselves in our lives can become extremely uncomfortable. So I'm always a little challenged by these kind of teachings which talk about being able to sort of let go and return to the whole, return to the non-dual state, return home. And so it's something that I've really been exploring. And I think that what I'd like to do today is unpack it in a more simplistic way, with this caveat that I don't, understand the non-duality, duality potentially as much as some of those more hardcore teachings. But I'd like to offer a way that we could work with it practically in our lives right now. And what I have done is kind of renamed it the conditioned state and the unconditioned state. So it's a kind of state of being, or a state of maybe just a state of being. So when it's unconditioned, there is no form to that being, and when it's conditioned, it is manifested into form. So I think what we're talking about in that non-dual state is that we are made of energy. The whole universe is made of energy, and when it's in an unconditioned state, I mean, it's straightforward, isn't it? There is no form to that energy. It's just energy. It's alive. It's just got this sense of maybe like white noise feeling, where it's just a buzz potentially. We are in the non-state. We're not formed in any sort of way. And if we think about us as human beings, we came from somewhere. I mean, we don't know where, but before we manifested into form, into a conditioned state, into a baby's body, and were delivered out into the world, the idea is that we came from this non-conditioned state. We came from nothingness, no thing, right? Nothingness. There's no thing. So it's just everything. This energy, just this. Imagine like water in a way. It's just this huge ocean. And then when we rise or come out or are formed as a baby, there is a wave potentially in the ocean. It arises out of the ocean, and then it exists, and we exist for our lifetime until we die, and then we return back into that nothingness or into that ocean. So the movement really is that something arises out of nothing, and then it falls back into something. Something arises out of nothing, and then it falls back down into nothing. So it's kind of like this flow of you're here and then you're not. You're here and then you're not. And when we're talking about the non-duality, it's when you've returned back into the not. There's no intention, there's no form, there's no belief, there's no anything. It's just complete openness. And then something arises. In this instance, I've told you, that the example I'm using is we arise as a human being. A baby is born, it goes out into the world, it has a life. And while it's having a life, it's a conditioned state, it's a conditioned being. What a lot of these teachings are talking about is that when you are alive as a human being, you can actually move through this flow, and you do, through this being, non-being, being, non-being. And what they're referring to here is that your sense of self, the sense of who am I, is not fixed. That is, even though we create labels that intend to kind of create a fixed identity, such as your name, you have that name from the beginning of your life to the end of your life, unless you choose to change it. However, we do often change our last names when we get married, which is reflective of how there's a shift or a change in the I. I might no longer be Isha Ropert, I'll be Isha Predali. As a kind of representation that I'm no longer operating on my own, I've now joined up in a partnership with my husband. However, I did choose to keep my original name. And these are just things that you can play with. It's a kind of fun way to look at or to know that we are constantly transforming. And what that transforming means is that the energy that we're made up of, it never stays still. It's never fixed. It's constantly moving every single second of our lives. But somehow we've got caught up in a mind experience of reality that is quite fixed, which is it believes in fixating or creating a belief that is very fixed and then living our life through that belief. So for example, I'm born into my name, Isha. I'm born into what the society perceives my gender to be, female. I'm born into a skin color where the society that I'm born into already has belief systems about that skin color in place, or fabricated, mind you. But as we live through beliefs, when we live through our mind, these beliefs actually become our reality, a shared reality, and we experience the consequences of that. So when we live through the mind, we are constantly living through a fixed belief in that moment of who I am and what the world is about. And that is, I guess, what the teachings are pointing to, the danger, the limitation of being a human being that lives through the mind, because the mind operates through thought and the thought operates through beliefs. So you can see how we end up operating in this very fixed or conditioned state. And I've talked about what is the conditioned self in previous videos. So really this duality, non-duality, the idea is that the non-dual state is the unconditioned state. It's where you return to not identifying in any way, shape or form. You are simply here as unformed energy. And then you arise out, potentially you're responding to something or to someone, and you become something in that moment. For example, I have a baby. I become a mother in that moment. But the type of mother that I become and the way that I mother will continually transform throughout the entire experience of being a mother to my child, if I let it. However, if my child is born and I believe that there is a certain way of being a mother, this is a good mother and that is a bad mother, this is a loving mother and that is an unloving mother, I've already created a belief about what a mother is, and I will attempt to live through that belief for the entire time that I'm a mother. And that takes energy. Maintaining a fixed identity, an identity that I have fixated on, takes energy. And our entire lives are set up like this. We choose a career and then that becomes our fixed identity, and we maintain and energize that career, and it becomes a lifelong experience. But imagine careers didn't exist. Imagine every single day we got up and we simply worked in whatever capacity we were asked to work in that day, potentially doing a bit of gardening, potentially counseling someone, whatever our natural talents were, they were simply called out in this new world that we were living in. And there was no fixed sense of self. I am not a teacher. I'm not a mother. I'm not a woman. I'm simply energy that continually reshapes itself every single day. So that's probably a more even esoteric way of looking at it. Put simply, when we look at this duality or non-duality, or moving from an unconditioned state to a conditioned state, what it really allows us to do is to understand what it is to be authentic in our lives, or to meet life in our authenticity. Be real. I love that saying, let's just all be real. But what does it mean? It doesn't mean be honest in the way of giving your judgments and opinions. It means be with reality in a way, in an authentic way. So show up every single day and meet the reality with no agenda in this unconditioned state, and allow whatever shows up in your life that day to shape how you are conditioned just for that day. So imagine I'm Barbara. I don't know if you ever know the Barbara Papa series, but they're fantastic. It's these entities that continually reshape themselves. So they're actually nothing. They're just a blob. And then whatever's going on in the story or the day, they reshape. So if they're playing music, they reshape into instruments. If they're cooking, they reshape into cooking utensils. If they're doing painting, they reshape into tools that allow them to paint. But it's a beautiful analogy of what this way of living looks like. It means that there is no sense of a self that you have attached to, an identity of yourself. Yourself is simply an ever-changing entity or being. So who you were born isn't who you'll die being. There is, of course, an eternal aspect to us, and I talked about that last week in looking at existential fear. And that eternal aspect is this energy that has the capacity for transformation. That is the eternal part of our nature, the true self. That is the true self. It's not being a truthful person. It is our true state, is that energy state that is unformed, unconditioned. And these words, they play out in so many ways. We talk about unconditional love all the time, for example. What is unconditional love? And people think it's loving people without conditions. And it's so far away from that. Unconditioned love is love, energy, in an unconditioned state. There is no form to it. There's no expectation. We haven't identified as a particular thing or a being or a way of being or a role or a function. We're just in that very open, very undefined state. So who I am is undefined. It is unknown. It is only defined momentarily, in the moment, when I am meeting life and co-creating with it. When my child calls to me, I meet that moment as a mother. And then I've got all these adverbs or adjectives about how I am as a mother, how I am in my being as a mother in that moment. But it's just for that moment. And then it falls away and I return to unknown and unidentified, a person, a being that is just here and experiencing and transforming. And this offers you so much capacity for freshness. Imagine every day you woke up and you had no sense of who you are. Every day was just fresh, and you simply learnt about what you can be in any given moment based on what shows up. That is creative play. That is like the child who jumps into the playground, doesn't know anybody, doesn't know anything, and just free falls into the experience. And in that 5 minutes, they can be a soldier, a warrior, a nurse. I'm just using roles and functions, but what I mean is that capacity to shape shift can occur so quickly in a child in an environment where they're just meeting whatever's showing up and with no sense of who am I in this situation. They have been many forms in 1 hour, many people in 1 hour, many parts of themselves have emerged and met the moment. But at the end of the day, it's all the one self, the true self, this energy that can reshape itself. So when we refer to that non-dual state, we're really referring to that energy field that we all arise out of that has no form to it. You can't describe it. It's why it's difficult to actually do videos on it or teachings on it. It's indescribable. It just simply is the nothingness. And I am the thing that arises from the nothingness. And how I think about myself defines how I experience the thing that is me that has arisen out of the nothing. So you can be very creative if you're detached from any strong identity or any sense of self that you identify with as being who you are. Then suddenly who you are is a continually transforming, creative adventure, one could say. And it's not always pretty. I can just be so anxious sometimes. It really, around my children that can show up, or I can be rageful, or I can be flirtatious. There are so many aspects to this nature that just shows up here and there. None of those are my true self. They're just simply an expression of the energy in that given moment that has been brought out and is responding or co-creating with what has shown up. And that's what we talk about when we co-create with life. As beings, we are the life that we're co-creating with, but there is this kind of magic that happens when our formed self, this human, interacts with other forms that show up, and it becomes this kind of chemistry, and it creates a third entity which becomes this sense of self that exists just in that moment. Even when I'm unpacking it, I can sense how it is a kind of complicated area. So if we just really stick to how does this empower your life? Well, what it allows you to do is when you're in a fixed moment, when you're feeling stressed, for example, or anxious, or forceful about the future, you can tap into, I'm in a very rigid, conditioned state right now. What happens if I let go? I release that contracted energy, and I just breathe back into my body, and I breathe and I imagine myself just melting back into the nothingness. I am no thing. And you just relax into and imagine, visualize yourself dissolving back into the ocean and really staying there for a while and just allowing all of that to die down and become nothing. And that creates space for something new to emerge. You will rise up again and meet whatever it is in your life that you need to meet, refreshed, without all those beliefs, all that mind chatter about how it should be or what you need to be afraid of or what you should prepare for. It really helps you to let go and get used to letting go of this fixed way of interacting with whatever is showing up in your life. And what you can trust is, if you're feeling anxious, if you're feeling distressed, if you're feeling fatigued, depressed, all those things that are really not fun things to be feeling or don't make you feel happy, you can be sure that you've attached to a fixed sense of self that is creating this. There is a sense of self that you believe is true, and therefore you're creating this anxiety because this sense of self can't meet whatever it is that you have, whatever expectation it is that you're trying to meet. So really it's just a beautiful way of letting go of the stress or the anxiety or the depression by remembering this is I'm stuck in a fixed sense of self, and I just simply need to release and return to the whole, return to the ocean, return to that non-conditioned state where this contrast doesn't exist, good and bad, right and wrong. Because in the dual state, duality, the state of duality, or in this constructed reality, there is this sense of right and wrong, good and bad. We get caught in this way of thinking, and it's this way of thinking then that creates all the stress. So if we come back and let go of the mind and living through the mind and come back into I am energy, and I just simply need to return to the whole and allow what shows up to come in its own time, you're actually cultivating a way of being in the world that is naturally transformative. You don't have to force transformations in your life. They're happening every single minute of your life. That we allow this physically because we can't control it, but we really control the mind, and we don't allow our psychology in a way to continually transform. This is a psychological process. We do need to educate our psychology on how to return to the whole or to the unconditioned state, so that it can arise in a new state of mind that is much healthier and more powerful. I talk a lot about this in my work on the 3 levels of mindset. This idea that our mind is actually evolving, and it is becoming more empowered, and it is fine-tuning its capacity to help us create our reality. And in the past it was very problem focused, looking at ways to solve the big problems and ways to keep us alive. It was very survival focused. Then it became about quality of life, advancement, betterment, the improvement mindset, the progress mindset. And we've really exhausted that, and we're moving into a new era of the mind of potential, where we in a way transcend the mind. We no longer live solely through the mind, because it is such a limited way of experiencing ourselves in the world. And we become we cultivate this compassionate mind, and this compassionate mind allows us to understand our own nature in the context of the larger universal nature. So really, if you just want to bottom line it, what you want to be doing in your life is cultivating a compassionate mindset, being able to understand this rhythm between being an unconditioned state and a conditioned state really helps you to physically and psychologically condition yourself to be able to let go of those fixed ways of thinking. When the mind gets fixated and fixed on a certain self that you have created, and then it really limits your life and what you can achieve or how you can show up to your life based on this really fixed perception. So it's all about releasing those moments of fixated perception and coming back and having no perception, no thought, no agenda, no sense of self, nothing, no thing. And in time, a new thing will arise out of that, and hopefully, I believe, a more evolved thing, a more evolved psychology, a more evolved mind, a more evolved perception. So it's really this beautiful, like breathing in and out. Lots of teachings use the ocean wave analogy because it works so well. Return to the ocean, allow a new wave to emerge. Every wave is different. Every wave arises and falls. It's just so beautiful the way that nature is always teaching us about our own nature. We are all one nature. It's beautiful. The only aspect of the human experience that doesn't align with that is the mind. The mind keeps us in a delusion by having us identify as a self that is fixed. So if anything from this video that you take away and apply, just remember that your sense of self is fluid, it's transforming, it's a constantly moving work of art. There is no fixed self that you can rely on and trust in. That is illusionary. The more that you try to create safety around a fixed sense of self, the more unsafe you become. So if you find this interesting, curious, you want to know more about the work we do here, visit Higher Life Academy, www.higherlifeacademy.com, and check out our free masterclasses, Choosing the Spiritually Driven Life, or our foundation or first masterclass, The Empowered Way, that will really set you up for the path of personal transformation. So until next time, take care and love life.